Hi everyone, Andrew from Kensington Wine Market here to do your single bottle tasting of our new Balblair 1997. This is a lovely single malt, big sherry, rich, spicy, classic sherry cask whiskey from our friends at Gordon MacPhail, 24 years of age, and I'm sure you're dying to try it. So let's just dive right in. Pour ourselves a little sample here. I always like to do a little pre-taste, little toast before we get going here, because this is going to help us acclimatize to cask strength whiskey. We're going from 0 to 58.3% here, and it's going to help cleanse our palates of whatever happens to be in there before. Heaven forbid another whiskey, maybe a beer, dinner, lunch, a cigarette, who knows. Anyway, slange everybody. Cheers. All right. Warming, spicy, Christmas cake, lovely. We are talking about Balblair Distillery, maybe just a little bit about Balblair before we get too far into the whiskey. It's a fairly old distillery dating from 1790. There is some evidence the distillery might have been operating as far back as 1749, which would put it in contention for being one of the oldest distilleries in Scotland. But it's also worth noting the distillery moved in 1872. So, you know, if we were going to get picky and technical about it, we could ask, is perhaps 1872 the actual founding date of the distillery? One other curious little fact about the distillery is that it sits on the lands of the Clan Ross family. And Clan Ross controlled these lands for quite some time, from the 1300s right up until 1972, when, until 2012, when the lands became the property of Mohammed Al Fayed. And if that name sounds familiar to you, it should, because his son was Princess Di's beau, and sadly perished with him in Paris all those many years ago. Mohammed also is the owner of Harrods, and so that might be why his name rings a bell. The distillery, when it first came out as a single malt, went with a vintage concept. So rather than having age statement whiskeys, they bottled different vintages. And they did this up until 2019, when they decided to take a more conventional age statement approach. And I think there's a couple reasons for this. One of which is it's hard to build a brand when you're releasing vintages that could be a little bit to not a lot like the last time you released said vintage, like say 89 or 95 or 2000. One might be more bourbon cask, one might be more sherry cask. So it was a little harder for people to appreciate that approach. But I think also it was harder for people to understand the age of the whiskey and the value therein. So they took that approach. One other reason for it might be that Balblair is also owned by the same company that owns Knockdhu, which trades under Annock, and Pulteney Distilleries, and as well as Speyburn. And I think it probably just got lost. There was a lot of excitement, especially in the 2010s, for Old Pulteney. That was quite a rising decade for that distillery. And after Annock, I think Balblair was just kind of forgotten and maybe not given the amount of focus it deserved. The distillery has wooden washbacks, fairly slow fermentations, which we love, kind of creating that older style whiskey. And then it's got very small dumpy stills, which it runs in a way to create a bit of a slightly sulfury spirit. And they do this intentionally, much as distilleries like Mortlake do, Craigellachie as well. They're trying to create a style that will have a bit more body, a bit more weight. Those sulfury tones can sort of mellow and burn off over time. And they work especially well with sherry casks. And no surprise here that we're talking about Balblair from a sherry cask. And this is maybe my segue into Gordon MacPhail. Nobody has better sherry casks than Gordon MacPhail. This is our first ever exclusive cask of Balblair. As I mentioned before, distilled in 1997 from a refill sherry hogshead, cask number 1870. Just 214 bottles. The Angels were greedy on this one, it would seem. Bottled at 24 years of age, and as I mentioned before, 58.3% cask strength. This is an incredibly good deal for a whiskey. I believe, and I got to double check here. Fortunately, I've got my cheat sheet up, coming in at $315 a bottle. Not an inexpensive single malt, to be fair, but for a 24-year-old, beautiful, flawless sherry, it's a great buy. And when you consider that the distillery bottle 25-year-old is more than double the price, it seems like an even better value. And I think that's one of the things that's sort of cool about where Gordon MacPhail is at right now in their brand. I mean, obviously they've got some incredibly expensive older whiskeys, the kind of ages and vintages no one else has. But in that under 30 range, 30 years of age and under, they seem to have stocks that no one else does. And relatively speaking, they're offering some very good value there. So tasting note, let's give this one a proper taste this time, starting with the nose. Getting some nice chocolate tones right there off the bat. A little bit of a espresso note, maybe a bit of like a cappuccino. I don't know if you remember back in the olden times, they still do this in the UK where they would dust the top of your foam with a little bit of dark chocolate, getting a note of that. As you get into it more, I am starting to get like sticky toffee pudding, Christmas cake tones. In my original tasting note for this that I wrote a couple of months ago, I noted ginger and pumpkin spice cookies. My daughter Chloe makes those, so it's reminding me of that on the nose too. Some nice spices coming in. You do feel a bit of warmth from the alcohol. It is almost 60%, but it's not sharp, it's not rough. Let's go ahead and give it a taste. On the palate, nice mouthfeel. You can see a little bit of that meaty sulfury note coming through. Leather, chocolate, tobacco, those classic sherry notes, Christmas cake as well too, that sticky toffee pudding notes there as well. And then underneath that, you're starting to get into this like vaguely tropical fruit, bit of mango, papaya coming out, dried apricots, lots of fruity tones, dried dark fruits as well too, raisins and figs. On the second sip, I'm getting more like spicy, woody tones to it. This is a boldly sherried whiskey, much more bold than you would probably typically expect for a refill sherry cask, but still very well balanced. It's far from being over oaked, and in the direction of those kind of classic, old school sherry notes like the Christmas cake, candied fruits as well too. Give it one more final taste and we'll get the finish here. Yeah, that's very pretty. One thing to quickly note about this and talk about this, I talked about how no one has better sherry cask than Gordon MacPhail. And the reason for that is most of the industry today is using sort of a speed seasoned sherry cask where the casks are filled with sherry for 6 to 8 months, rarely more than that. And then they're quickly shipped to Scotland, filled with whiskey, laid down to mature. And they're creating what we kind of refer to as a modern style sherried whiskey. And some of these whiskeys are still lovely. They're great drams, but it's not what sherry casks used to be like. Gordon MacPhail has a different approach to this. They've been doing things their way for 4 generations now, approaching 130 years. And they have contracts and relationships with bodegas in Spain and cooperages going back, again, probably a century or more. They specify thicker staves for their casks than other producers do. And they also specify a longer sherry seasoning process. And in my mind, it's like something like 6 to 8 years. Regardless of whether it's 6 or 8 years, it's many times longer than most other companies will season their wood. This costs them more, but ultimately it creates a better product. And if you look at a lot of the sherry cask whiskeys that are out there right now, there are few companies that are bottling whiskeys that are as good as Gordon MacPhail's, especially in the sherry department. And I suppose I should tie in there their distillery Ben-Romick, because they've been filling whiskeys into those, first-rate sherry casks at both Ben-Romick as well as Gordon MacPhail. And the wood policy holds true for American oak, for ex-bourbon seasoned casks as well too. The company is very conscious of their brand. They've got a very long-term vision, and it really carries through in the product. So one last little taste here. still beautiful. Starting to see those nice exotic fruits starting to come out, especially on the finish. It's fresh, fruity, and really tasty. If you like sherry cask whiskeys like Macallan, Aberlour, Glenfarclas, Glendronach, you're going to love this. While it lasts, which I don't think will be for long, as I mentioned before, $315, only available at Kensington Wine Market. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you enjoyed this little wee tasting. And until next time, Slange.